Okay. Thank you for joining us today for this informative workshop, You Don't Know What You Don't Know. It's presented by Esther Pipoly, founder of LOLA, Loss of Life Advocates. Esther, thank you for your time today. Would you like to introduce yourself and get started?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I am coming to you from the sweet city of San Antonio, Texas. So it is good to be with all of you to share time and space. And as we continue to go through my presentation, please do feel free to ask any questions in the chat. We'll monitor them. I will tell you that there are no questions that come at me that if I don't know the answers, I will run and find somebody to help me find the answers for you. So thank you for sharing time. I think it's the most precious thing we can have with each other. I'm going to put myself, let's see, I'm going to try to, there you go. Okay. So my name is Esther. I started Lola, and today we're going to talk a little bit about navigating the inevitable and avoiding chaos. You don't know what you don't know. Being a caregiver is a very stressful thing that one of us, all of us are going through. And a little bit about my story, and I apologize for just kind of being a little all over the place because sometimes I'm talking to different industry professionals, and I want to share with you that the common thread is that we're all going through something at the same time. We're all caregivers, whether we're caring for aging parents, caring for children, caring for, troubled teens. And we're also going to work and we're trying to put on the best faces that we can, moving through our days, going, one foot in front of the other. So my name is Esther. I started Lola. Lola was my mom. That was her endearing, sweet name that my dad would call her at the end of the day. Lola, I'm home, just like Lucy. But I entered into the year of 2013 when my dad, who was my best friend, actually became very, very ill. He had C. diff. And I picked him up to take him to the emergency room. And he was a very independent 81-year-old gentleman who taught economics and had a very colorful career, and he went from being a very strong, walking, talking grandpa and father and best friend to not being able to walk. He had his large intestine removed, and before that, we had prepared because my mom died in 1999. So, having had lost my mother, I was in the front seat caring for my father during this really critical time. And we had actually sat down in 2012 and put all of his affairs in order because he wanted to be prepared and organized, knowing that my mom was gone. He knew that at some point it was going to fall on me. And when it did, I remember signing off on papers for him to have his large intestine removed here in San Antonio. And as soon as they wheeled him off to surgery, I was running around the corner and crawled up in a ball on the ground and just bawled because I thought, wow, I don't know that he knows what we're doing. He wants to live, he wants to survive. And there's nothing more painful than watching a parent with their eyes on you saying, we're doing the right thing, right? I'm having the surgery, I'm going to be fine. Well, he was in ICU for 3 weeks. His legs atrophied. I had to break him out, get him into a skilled nursing facility, and then he never walked again. He was in a wheelchair, and he went from being strong and independent and having a calendar to never going home. He ended up going from that skilled nursing facility into an independent living facility with 24-hour care. And I share this story with you, and I start here because um, he was part of my story. But when he got sick and this all happened, I was living in San Antonio and I was going through the transition of our youngest daughter, my husband and I's youngest daughter, graduating from Denver University. And my husband saying, you know what, I'm ready to just take a little break and let's move. So we were going through our own life transition of a daughter graduating, our kids have moved on, what we thought. And then all of a sudden, my dad gets sick and I had found a job in Colorado. And so my husband and I are going one direction, thinking we're going to he's going to semi-retire, I'm going to continue working. But then my dad gets sick and I'm front and center. I'm his durable power of attorney, his medical power of attorney, everything to making decisions for him. And now having to, start a new career, moving, all these things. And I'm sharing the chaos with you because that's what it feels like. You think you're on the right path, your kids are graduating, you think your family, your parents are healthy, and then something happens and it just starts this huge domino effect. So what ended up happening was my dad in 2014 ended up having cancer among other things, and he did his second round of chemo and he passed away. So not successful with the cancer, trying to beat that. But for a year, I was flying back and forth from Colorado to Texas, taking calls all hours of the night for my dad's care. During this time, my husband and I were trying to shut down a business in San Antonio, move to Colorado, take care of my father, manage bills, manage medical questions. And my husband, the day my dad died, I remember my husband going to the funeral home with me and helping me eloquently write my dad's funeral as his obituary. And shortly thereafter, my husband was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and died literally like 53 days later from my dad. And so it was fast, it was furious, and um, it was unexpected. So I went through this like, kind of crazy time frame in 2014 from my dad in 13 being, going through a surgery, 14 caregiving for him, moving to another state, flying back and forth, being his medical power of attorney, being his durable power of attorney, then him dying, going through that process, watching my father pass away. And there were a lot of things with that. I won't go into the gory details, but um, then my husband being diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and him dying. And in that moment, in that year of 2014, I thought, oh my God, like where's the playbook? Like where do people go to? Who do they go to? And I kept waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and looking for some type of support. I needed somebody to tell me, well, here's what you do first, and here's what you do second, and here's what the hurdle you jump. And don't do that because that's going to set off another domino effect. So having lost my dad and my husband, I was alone in the world. And from 2014 on, with 2 adult children, we were having to navigate financial decisions and all kinds of things. So ended up moving back to Texas. And in the middle of all that, I had to fight for my husband's life insurance because it didn't pay and there's no appeal process. And so you have to actually file a lawsuit. So I entered into a lawsuit to fight for what my husband had left me. And it took me 840 days to settle that lawsuit. It was every corner of my life and my marriage and my family. Every time I went to an employee assistance program, therapy session, all of that was discoverable. So 26 years of my marriage was under a microscope during this life insurance dispute. And when we finally settled 840 days later, at the end of 2016, I looked around and I thought, okay, I'm going to start what I think people need in this space, which is having somebody to go to when there's really terrible moments that you're going through and you need advice. And sometimes a family friend is going to give you what they think is right, but having a professional that's coming with you to bring professionals to the table to support you is really important in a time, and it's really has to be fast. You need somebody that can actually turn on a dime for you. So we started LOLA, my kids and I, in 2017. I'm in my 10th year of doing this. We do work all across the country. I thought I would just be a localized in Texas and in San Antonio, but then what happened, COVID in 2020, and quickly we started working with families from Washington State to Vermont, down to Florida, Georgia, Colorado, and California. And so we virtually can help families triage what they need from birth to bereavement, and any of those type of events that come up, we're able to, in 3 hours, surprisingly enough, we're able to um, actively help step in and guide a family and get them access to the resources they need. So that is my story, and Lola is my mother. And I like to say she was not a showgirl, but she was my hero, and she was an educator and would say that knowledge is power. And the elephant to the left of the screen is the elephant in the room because most people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about the hard things. And so today we're going to dive in, and I hope that you take away a little bit of information for you. And you have my email if anybody is needing anything. We are certainly happy to help you and guide you as if we can. All right, so here we go. So let's begin. Let's chat. So you've heard my story, and I know a lot of people probably have similar stories. And like I said, we all went through COVID, so we all lost somebody we love, or we know somebody that lost somebody that they love. So I love starting here because we all sit in a sea of grief. I like the elephant, as you can see. That is something that I identify with because I try not to forget who I'm helping and what they're needing and how, and try never to forget the feelings of that grief and that panic that I felt. And so we really do try to have some difficult conversations ahead of time. We sometimes work with families at time of diagnosis. Many families we work with right upon a transition of life and when somebody passes away and afterwards when they're trying to find documents. And so when we work with families, we know that the hardest discussion is the one that starts with, where do we begin? So let's go. case studies. What I'd like to do is share just a few of what I think is some of the families over the last 10 years, we've helped so many families, but we recently had a mom here in San Antonio, Texas, that would not. She was going through cancer. She was starting to have dementia signs. Her daughter reached out to us and said, "Look, I can't. I'm working remote. I work for a big company. I've got a big job. I manage 300 people. I need help with trying to get my mom to go to the hospital because she doesn't want to go. She thinks if she goes, she's going to die." And so we got on a Zoom call and she was with her mom and I, gently asked her mom, like, what's the goal? Like, you're not feeling well. You look like you're not feeling well. She was very nauseous. She was very thin, painfully thin. And she said, well, I don't have any of my documents in order and my house is a wreck. And, people are going to come here after I die and I'm going to get judged. And so we started kind of taking it piece by piece. And I said, well, let's start with, getting your legal documents done. So we were able to do an intake, and we work with lawyers here in Texas that can put together legal documents within 24 hours. And once we did the intake, and I told her, I have your documents, she agreed to go into the hospital. And we talked a little bit about her hoarding because she said, I'm a hoarder and I don't want to be judged. Well, I told her not to worry about it, that, when these are little gifts that you're leaving behind. And so we tried to kind of change the dialogue with her, and she ended up going in. I went the next day with my notary stamp, and I walked in the room and I introduced myself, and she was doing an adult dot to dot, which I don't know if any of y'all have seen those, but they're pretty cool. And I introduced myself, and her daughter was there. And her daughter immediately came over and gave me a big hug and said, thank you. I think getting the documents was the first step. So we started notarizing, and I said, well, tell me everything else that's going on. Like, what are your biggest fears? And she said, well, I'm going to die. And, and then my daughter's going to be alone. And she's an only child. And I feel like I've worked two jobs all my career. I just don't want to leave her. So I'm just panicked. And so we sat down and we had a really good mother-daughter conversation, and the daughter saying, it's okay. Like, it is okay for you to transition. And I think the mom knew more than anybody else, in the room, that she was just holding on because she didn't want to leave her daughter or her grandkids. So I ended up doing her documents, notarizing them, and she the next day actually passed away. Her daughter called me in a panic and said, my mom just died. And it was really quick because I remember I video my clients, and I did a video of her and said, hey, can you tell me your name and can you tell me what day of the week it is and what month we're in? And I do that for capacity issues. And she had this sweet video. So she ends up passing away. The daughter says, well, I need to go to the funeral home. We need to start planning these things. And so I start walking her through, what's your budget? Like, does your mom want to be cremated? Does she want to be buried? And so she ended up making the decision to have her cremated, but she didn't want to go to the funeral home alone. So we were able to meet her there. And again, because we're local, it makes sense, but we do have people that we work with all over the country that we can ask them to go and be with a family if they're by themselves. So I ended up meeting this young lady, the daughter, and we get into the funeral home. And what does the funeral director say? Do you have a picture of your mom? If you don't, it has to be within the last 60 days. If not, then we need to have you identify her body. And the daughter starts breaking down in tears. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, I have this video. And so I brought up the video, I snapped a picture, I sent it over to the funeral director via email, and she said, this is good enough. So she was able to go out, come back and say, yes, I identified your mom. I say this case study because here's a mom not wanting to leave her daughter, the daughter trying to do the right thing, trying to get her mom to the hospital because she knows that she's sick. The mom saying, I'm going to be afraid, I'm going to die in the hospital. And that's exactly what happened. And so Lola was able to at least walk through these dark moments and hold a flashlight for this daughter and the mom to make sure that they both knew at the end of the day they were going to be okay. The second one is, a stroke and a heart attack. We had a client here in San Antonio that we worked with because he wanted to get his affairs in order. And during COVID, he actually had a flesh-eating disease that actually he lost his eye, part of his jaw. And so he came out of COVID very, very frail, but he was like, I'm wanting to make sure I have all my affairs in order for my daughters. And so we were able to walk him through getting all of his documents done. We talked about all the conversations. He sold his home. He wanted to get out, live in an independent living community. He didn't want his kids to be left with a home and having to pack out. So he wanted to do all those things ahead of time, and we were able to help him over the course of a year. And then we ended up getting his documents notarized because he had them prepared, but he never notarized them. So I was like, okay, well, let's get some witnesses in. We got some witnesses. We notarized his documents. And shortly thereafter, I would pick him up and take him to doctor's appointments when his daughters couldn't. And we're going through the motions and having a really good relationship with him. And he was really bouncing back. He really wanted to learn how to drive again. So we were like, you're not going to be able to drive with one eye. And so having to go through these conversations with his daughters, and he's wanting to be independent. They're recognizing dad's getting older. He's feeling better. So it was this measuring stick, right? We're kind of walking through the family with, okay, your dad's doing everything he can to make sure that y'all aren't left with a mess. He ends up going to go slice a pill in half on his counter one day and ends up having a massive heart attack and then a stroke. And the community finds him in his little unit. And the daughter calls me and says, I know it's like 5 o'clock, it's rush hour traffic, but they want me to come in and identify my dad, and I cannot identify my dad. I just can't do it. So, quickly put my stuff in order and was able to drive over. And I walked in, and he was, on the floor in his kitchen, and I could tell that he had been trying to cut a pill in half, and I think it just happened so fast. Um, but I said, yes, I told the community, yes, we've got verification, the sheriff's department, they didn't have to call the coroner. We were waiting for the funeral home, and I'm sitting with the family across the hall, and we're talking about what he wanted and, how he was doing things. And as soon as the funeral home came and took his body away, we went into his unit, and I actually let them go in first so that they could kind of take a minute to be in his space by themselves. And then they came running back and said, you need to come in and see this. And I said, oh my gosh, okay. So I walk over, and in his room, he has a LOLA playbook, which is what we had put together. And it was sitting up on his pillow in his bedroom, like he was going to do something with it. And the kids said, Esther, this is like, a tribute to you, that he was thinking about you at the end of his life. But these are just two case studies of the kind of work that we do, walking families through getting mom into a hospital, getting the legal documents set up, helping a family navigate a loved one who's aging but yet feeling good, but then suddenly dies. So we really do kind of get into the nitty gritty, and all of us can relate to this, right? Because we all know somebody that's gone through cancer. We all know people that are reluctant to go into the hospital. We all know people that are going through watching their parents age, but yet maybe the parents don't see themselves as aging as fast as the kids do. And I always tell my kids that I'm going to be 58 this year, so I always say, I know I know you have to tell me, you have to be my meter stick on what you're seeing. And my kids do sit down and have conversations with me and tell me, Mom, you used to be able to do this, and now we're watching you and you can't do this. So I think that today, when you're watching this and listening to this, thinking of yourself as not only a caregiver for somebody else, but thinking of yourself and your measuring stick and how you can work within your family and have those people around you in that circle of trust that are constantly doing wellness checks on each other, because being caregivers is hard. So today's topic of discussion, I'd like to talk a little bit about hospital to home. How does a family navigate these moments? How does a professional provide guidance? How does one have self-preservation in these moments? And I want to take kind of a sidestep here, because I chose this subject because this is where families get stuck as caregivers. We're moving along with our family members. Something happens, just like my dad with his large intestine, and all of a sudden, we're at the hospital, and the hospital saying, we need the bed. We got to release mom or dad to go home. And in those moments, the family is going into a total meltdown. Sometimes the family is having to navigate, am I sending mom or dad home to be by themselves? Who's going to be the provider? Can they live alone? Can they walk? Do they have money to go into an independent living facility? How am I going to go to work and take care of them? All of those decisions start coming into a big ball of yarn, right? So we're trying to make those decisions. So going from just the hospital to the home is where I see families. And this is where I think, as caregivers, we have to think of this, because at some point, somebody that we caregive for is going to be in this position. And we as family members need to start thinking of, do I have my affairs in order? Does my loved one, my parent, have their affairs in order? And have we had those conversations? And how does a professional who's in these situations, or who do you go to in this situation, to make sure that you're seeking the guidance? Because the case managers in these hospitals, in these places, are trying to do their job to get the family moved out and along. But there has to be a moment when you seek the professional, the case manager, the nurse, to say, we need to know what we don't know. And that really is the big bulk of what caregiving is you don't know what you don't know until you're faced with it, and you're having to go into kind of a fast mode of making decisions about the caregiving and what you're going to do, and all the while taking care of yourself. So how does one have self-preservation in these moments? how does a family navigate them? Finding proper guidance and support. Who do you go to if you're in the hospital, or maybe you're not at the hospital yet, but you've got a parent that can no longer stay at home? Can they come live with you? Did they, have a 401k? Do they have the financial support? We find more and more that families don't have the financial support to get mom or dad into what they need for, whatever, whether it's Medicaid to put them into a proper home or a community, or Medicaid at home to bring in that support at home while you go to work. Whether it's a family member, right? It's looking for who's going to be that support for you and who's going to help you get there. Looking at private homes versus, who to trust, the cost of those things, when we're talking about putting mom in a home, I don't know in Kentucky what it looks like, but in Texas, private care homes start at $800 for very basic level care. It goes up with every level of medication and whether they're wheelchair bound, whether they need help being bathed, all the way up to $10,000 a month. And I don't know about you, I don't know anybody who has that type of money. And if they do, then they're in a good spot, but they're still going to worry about is what I'm paying for the best that I can buy for my parent or my loved one. So, private care homes, then there's the communities. Nobody wants to go into a nursing home, but it does come down to budget. So again, you're in the hospital, you're in the middle of this, and you're trying to figure out how am I going to support, take care of my loved one. And it comes down to the budget, those conversations. Those are the true elephants in the room. What is the state of the home? If a parent or a loved one is wanting to go home, does the house have carpets that you can trip on? Is mom or dad a risk to fall, and hurt themselves? Do you need bars put up? Is there a veteran association tied to this? Because the VA has a lot of benefits, and a lot of people don't realize that there's money and support there for them if they want to stay in the home. And I always heard the statistic that 6% of people actually live in independent or assisted living communities. So that means that 94% of people that are aging in place are aging in their homes, or they're having to move into their children's home. All of these are difficult conversations. So who's there to support? Again, is it a family member? Is it a professional? Are you going to pay for support? What we see is that the average in-home support private care, many people think Medicare pays for this. They do not pay for the support that your loved one needs if they need to be fed, bathed, taken care, popped into during, when they're home. So it starts at about $30 an hour here in Texas. Across the country, it kind of goes up depending on where you live. It can go up to $40 to $50 an hour. So again, it's a budget conversation on top of making sure you have the legal documents to be able to make the decisions for this loved one. And then I always say the supporting team, people don't want to talk about hospice and palliative care, but whether you have a loved one that is on cancer, chemo, radiation, or dialysis, palliative care is a wonderful option for families to bring in, to have a third party that comes in and helps with mom or dad's dialysis or their chemo for nausea, for those pain management symptoms that come up after they leave the doctor's offices or they leave where they're getting treatment. A lot of people don't want to talk about it because they think it is the bridge to hospice, and it really is. But the palliative care team at least gets a third party that can make a phone call into a doctor's office to say, "Hey, this patient, this loved one was getting chemo. They came home. They've been throwing up. They're extremely nauseous." And because they're medical providers, that medical team has a faster line to the doctors and the nurses of your loved ones, and so it becomes kind of an extra, I call it the bench. You're building a bench when you're a caregiver for your loved ones and for your family and for yourself. And hospice, I do want to take a pause here and talk about hospice. I recently had a contract with a hospice company here in San Antonio, Texas, and I quickly learned that why hospice is so competitive is because they end up on Medicare, the reimbursement is about $5,000 a month. So when your loved one goes onto hospice, the appropriate amount of time is for somebody to be on hospice when they no longer can, be on chemo or radiation, but they need, pain management on a consistent basis. That $5,000 when your loved one goes on to hospice care is something that you need to be talking to the hospice company about, because you should be getting that spiritual support for your loved one and yourself, the social support for you and your family. You should be getting a doctor that is overlooking your loved one. You should be getting a nurse that comes in and visits at least once or twice a week to see and monitor your loved ones for symptoms and transitional symptoms. And then you have a medical assistant that comes in and helps bathe, to give your family, your loved one that's doing this care, the peace, and gives you a little bit of a break. And so I throw that number out there, and I recently just started adding it to my presentations, because when families are putting a loved one onto Medicare, you're getting the support, you're getting the bench support for your loved one. You also get respite as part of hospice. And so that gives the family some type of support for at least 2 to 3 days, if not longer, of being able to provide some relief for you and symptoms that you're taking on when your loved one's on hospice, to give you that break. But also, when you look at that number, if you're paying somebody $5,000 a month, your family member has the entitlement to Medicare. And if they're on hospice, then you, as the caregiver, are in the driver's seat to say, if you're not getting all of those touch points for your loved one, then there are a lot of hospice companies out there. You need to insist that they make sure that you're getting every single thing that is afforded to you, because they are getting paid. And that is why hospice is very competitive. So how does a professional provide guidance, finding the right team, for you as a caregiver, who do you trust in these moments? It's very important that you circle yourself with good people, confidential guidance, having the heart to heart with yourself, with your family, with your loved ones, sitting down and having the hard conversation, which I did with my dad, July 4th of 2014. Dad, you're going to die. And this is the natural procession of life, is that you're supposed to die so that when I die, you're there to receive me. And the tears that we cried together and having that heart to heart of it's okay, um, was something that was very difficult for me as an adult child, but it was also something that he needed to hear, that I was going to be okay. And I tell you this in this moment, this conversation, because my dad at that moment said, you have to promise me that if something happens, you'll come back to San Antonio, that you will not stay in Colorado, because that's where I was living at the time. And on the other side of this conversation was my husband, when he was dying of cancer, saying, okay, you're in Colorado, whatever you do, don't leave and go back to Texas. And so having these heart to heart conversations can be conflicting, but having them gives you at least that sense of peace, and gives your loved one that peace, that they can proceed, they can go. And sometimes it's hard for us to hear it and to say it, but those are the elephant in the room conversations. So let's look at out, just in, bought in, all in, and seeing a family. So many family members, I don't know if you're a caregiver on this call today, but these are kind of four different ways of looking at your family members. Are they out? Are they constantly not there to help and support as a caregiver? Are they never available? I've got to do this. I've got my kids. They're constantly busy. These are the people in the family that just never want to step in and get involved. They let you make all the decisions, but yet you need to figure out how to get them to just in, right? Because just in is at least putting one foot in and saying, well, can we negotiate? You come in for 4 or 5 hours a week so that I, as a caregiver, can go and get things done for myself. And the just-ins are the kids that, in the family that you're, as a caregiver, watching and loving somebody that you love. The just-ins are the people that are just in long enough to do the bare minimum before they want to go out again, right? So when you start looking at your families, think about that. Who are the outs? Who are the just-ins? And how do you get the just-ins to being bought in? And the bought-ins are the people that no matter what, I'm gonna be here. I'm gonna figure out how to manage my schedule. I'm gonna work. I'm gonna take care of my dad. I'm gonna go home and check in on him. I'm gonna make sure the food's there. I'm gonna make sure the appointments are being met. I'm bought into the process. I'm bought into hospice. I'm bought into the care as a caregiver. This is my job, as a child, as a spouse, whatever, whoever the loved one is, this is the person that you're bought into. It's making sure that they are getting over the field goal line. And then you have your all-in person in the family, and that person is no matter what, I'm all in. Like, I'm going to go with you the distance. I'm going to be here. I'm going to give up everything that is important to me, to making sure that I am all in, so that at the end of the day, when I have gone through and done everything I can for my loved one, I'm not having any regrets. And so, for many of you with me today, think about that in your current situation. If you are a caregiver, or if you're looking at a family and you can identify who are the outs, who are the just ins, who are the bought ins, and then who are your all ins. And then finally, having courage and compassion is super important because none of these things as a caregiver is important. But being courageous in these moments and having compassion for somebody. And I will tell you that sometimes people ask me, like, what's the best thing I can do for somebody that I'm caring for or a caregiver that I know is overwhelmed? Showing up and just sitting with them and being quiet and saying, whatever you need, I'm here for. And sometimes just showing up for people, knowing that they're in the middle of a fire, they're a caregiver, um, is being courageous. So that is something that's really important to me. So how does one have self-preservation in these moments? Knowing your own mental health status is in the moment. Am I okay? Do I need to take a step back? Do I need to take a breath? Writing down points to stay on point. I always tell people get note cards. Sounds crazy, but if you're going into a meeting with a doctor, you're going into a meeting with a family, you're going into a meeting with a caregiver, you are the caregiver and you need to talk to your family or your siblings about something. Writing your points down so you stay on point is very important. Focusing on the family and on the present, making sure that people in the room are no cell phones. Everybody is present in the moment, making sure that they're focusing on the goal and making sure you know what the goal is, whether you're the caregiver and what you need, or whether the loved one that you're caring for has things that need to be addressed and you can't make the decision by yourself. Understand the signs your body gives you, because it will. For me, my body gave me hypertension. I live with it. There are times that I can feel it going up. I can feel my anxiety taking over, and I do take that step back and I do go and I do the boxing 4-4-4 method, which is, breathing in for 4, holding it for 4, breathing out for 4, and sometimes just taking a minute and stepping aside and doing that helps at least me. It's a method that is something that professionals, and I believe the Marines do it. So it's something that if you need it for yourself, breathing is the most important thing. My daughter is a yoga instructor, and so she will sometimes tell me, you're not breathing, you're holding your breath. And I do it more often than not. So maybe just taking that mental and physical moment to take a step and say, what is my current status? How am I feeling? What is my body telling me? And what can I do to take care of myself? So the reality is that most families, whether you're going through this right now, they all think we've got this, and then they take a big sigh. Whew, yeah, we've got this. Okay. My mom or dad can manage this without support. My parents are fine, or maybe your parents are telling you they're fine and they're not. Mom is falling down, dad is incontinent. There's constant conversations and anger around resistance on the support, because what that means is that they, by leaning in and saying, yes, I need help, it's an acknowledgement. And for especially for parents, they think it's a failure. It's the acknowledgement of aging. There is enough family help. Most people will say, no, no, we got it. We've got enough family help. And what happens is your family starts to break down. The resilience starts to break down. Everybody's high at at the start. And then from there, slowly people start sleeping back. They start creeping, sliding down, doing the creep back, because they cannot keep up with the momentum because it's just going to be more. And then no outside intervention or help is needed. Most families will say, I don't need somebody to come in and help a couple hours a week. When they have a sibling that maybe lives out of state that says, hey, I'll put a budget towards this to give you the support. So, sometimes most families will be resistant to wanting the help because they think they can do it. There's a lot of pride in all of this, but really it is acknowledging that, you know what, there are people and professionals that can help you during these moments. The truth is, the family is not ready for what's coming. The silence will hit them like a boulder. Friends and family will be there for the beginning, but then they just slowly go away little by little. And finances become strained, leading to fatigue because as you start looking at budgets and having to make decisions, like I said, if you make the wrong first decision, it can lead to a really big domino effect. So having the conversation helps, but let's talk a little bit about how you on the call today can get prepared for yourself. Having your personal information in one location, your financial information somewhere where people can locate it, your legal documents, like do you have them? Do you have them in place for yourself? Who speaks for you if you can't speak? And more importantly, if you're caregiving, what happens if something happens to you? What are those documents in place for you so that your family knows if something happens to you, what the playbook is for your loved one that you're caring for, but then what is your own playbook? What are your own legal documents? Who's making those decisions? And how long will this last? Because a lot of people get caught in that. So let's break this down, your personal information. What do finances look like for support? Who has the legal decision-making power? And who is your inner circle that you can trust and turn to? Your personal information is everything from your first name, your last name, your driver's license number, unfortunately, your social security number. All of these things need to be kept in a confidential location. LOLA, we work with a lot of partners that have confidential cloud services. We work with individuals that will help you store your information, but knowing that your personal information, if something happens to you, who your children are, who your contacts are, who the people are that are making decisions for you if you can't speak, how your bills are paid. There's so many times we have caregivers that go in to get their own little medical procedure and they go in for outpatient surgery and it becomes a bigger thing than they thought. And all of a sudden now the finances are for mom or dad who they're caregiving for need to be taken care of as well as their own. And then the legal decision-making power, who's got the power to make decisions for you on your behalf if you cannot speak. If you've ever watched Jessica Zitter's video on Netflix, it is called Extremis. It's a 26-minute just documentary that will grab you in your throat of how she went from being an emergency room physician to now going across the country talking about having your legal affairs in order because when you're in the ER and you cannot speak, it is too late. And who is your inner circle that can make and you can trust and turn to that knows what you want? And that's important for caregivers. So your financial information, how do you pay your bills on your monthly cycles? Do you pay them on the internet? Do you automatically draft them? And who knows all this information? What is your income stream? What comes in? What goes out? Who are your financial partners? Do you have wealth financial managers? Um, do you have people that are investing money for you, or are your bankers the people that help you make financial decisions, and who has access to your finances? And this is one where we get caught up with caregivers because family members, their parents don't want to tell them where the money is. They think that maybe there's somebody in the family that will financially abuse the situation. So these are all conversations that really need to be managed ahead of time for yourself and for your loved one that you're caring for. The financials, who knows where it is? What's the budget? Is there anyone advising? Medicare, knowing what Medicare pays for, what Medicare doesn't pay for. Insurance, do you have it? Is it a retirement account? Are you in that donut hole? Early retiree, not yet eligible for Medicare. How are you doing this? Medicaid strategies, are you talking with your family and your caregivers about whether Medicaid is an eligibility for support and services for you? And then what is coming in and out? So time, caregiver fatigue is a real thing. How to prepare your family. Have you discussed with your family the details? Is there a blended family? How long can the family go caregiving? And no one has a crystal ball. So let's discuss quickly how we can be intentional. Love is the product of truthful communication. And I say this because if you're a caregiver with us today, this is something that you have to have for yourself. Love is the willingness and ability to allow others the right to make their own choices for themselves without any insistence that they satisfy me. Loving myself is having the willingness and acquiring the ability to allow myself the right to make my own choices for myself without the need for the approval of others. And this is really important if you're a caregiver. Knowing when to take a break, having resources to turn to, not being afraid to ask for help, and understanding you're grieving and your loved one is grieving too. And grief, this is something that we constantly go through as caregivers. It's the normal and natural reaction to a loss or trauma of any kind. Grief is the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. Grief is the feeling of reaching out for someone who has always been there only to discover when you need them one more time, they're no longer there. And grief is the feeling of reaching out for someone who has never been there, only to discover when you need them more than ever, they're still not there for you. So, fine, feelings inside out when people say, how are you as a caregiver? Or if you're caregiving for somebody else, I'm fine. Knowing that that is really just you pushing off, not wanting to address if there's something not right. So moving into 2026, knowing when to say, I'm not okay, knowing when to ask for help, having a team to turn to, getting your affairs in order. It is more than about your loved one you're caring for. It's about you too, and reviewing your important documents and having them in order. So I know I went through this presentation rather quickly. I shared a lot with you, and I want to give us a moment to have any questions, have any comments. I also want to be acknowledging that sometimes bringing up these presentations when I present, people don't know what to ask and don't really have comments. And so if you, again, would like to reach out to, we can give you our contact information. Feel free to email me if you think of something later. But I thank you for the opportunity to share my story, share with you things that I think that caregivers are needing to think about. They're hard things to have conversations about, but they are the elephant in the room. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and see where we're at.
Esther, this is great. This is wonderful information. I'm going to ask, can you just maybe share two or three things that were the big surprises that hit you when your dad died and then your husband died? I mean, what are the legal things that just
Yeah.
couldn't have possibly thought of?
So one of the things was my dad and I had set up a bank account ahead of time. And so he had walked me into his banking officer. I knew he knew me, I knew him. I was already the durable power of attorney. But your powers of attorney when your loved one dies, it dies with them. And so your executor position, if you're going to be probating an estate or having to walk through that process, you don't really have access to accounts unless you're on the account. So bank accounts will be frozen. So legally, having things set up and styled correctly to make sure you don't get cut off access to financials, because right after somebody dies, the very next thing is having to pay for a funeral, having to move somebody quickly out of an independent living facility. You've got pretty much to the end of the month, unless you're going to pay for another month. So where I ran into problems with my dad was he had just died and the facility was saying, hey, he died on the 25th. And unless you want to pay for another month of independent living, even though he's not here, which was about $7,000 a month, we need you to have the room cleared out and packed up and out by the end of July. And so that was really quick for me. And in that moment, because I'm not yet appointed as the executor from the probate court, my dad had a trust, but my sister wasn't around as a trustee to manage the trust. We were having to move really fast. And so legally making sure that you've got things styled, beneficiaries set up on the accounts, and that you talk with a lawyer when you know that something's going to happen to make sure that you've got things and documents in place, and whether you go through probate or not, looking at assets and making sure things are in order. But the bank accounts, I will tell you that caught me off guard, walking into the bank and them saying, well, your power of attorney died with your dad, but lucky for you, he put you on the account. So you do have access to money to pay for his funeral. Also, the credit cards, funeral homes will not accept a credit card in your loved one's name after they pass away. So making sure that there is money set aside to do all of those things, because it costs money, unfortunately, when somebody passes away. And on top of that, you're grieving. So I felt like I was going through kind of a movie and watching myself in the movie, moving through all of these emotions. And it took me 4 years to go and access grief support because I really thought I'm going to manage this. I'm okay. I'm going to do this. And I really wasn't. I was the duck on the water. I was going through a lot of anxiety. And I needed to dive into my employer and having the conversation with them and asking them, hey, what are my benefits? And one of the things I tell family members, especially caregivers, if you're working and you're afforded short-term disability, take it. It's pennies on the dollar because when you go through a loss or you need to take that short-term disability, for yourself, for anxiety, for grief, for not sleeping, for um, you know, all the things that come with caregiving and having a loss, that short-term disability policy is there for you because while grief is not a mental illness, the things that add up and the different symptoms that you have do qualify sometimes for short-term disability. So that is something that I always tell people, make sure you've got your documents in order, make sure you've got your banking in order, your beneficiaries on your accounts. Do not list children on your accounts because then it triggers probate, especially if they're under 18, which a lot of parents that are divorced don't want to leave the money to the other parent. So finding somebody that you trust, but also, having that conversation to make sure they're not going to mismanage the money for a child. And then also, making sure that when you get to the funeral home, if you have a blended family, making sure that everybody's on the same page. There is a one-page document called an agent for disposition of remains. If you have a blended family, have that filled out with who's going to be making decisions for you, whether it's funeral, cremation. Families get caught up and the funeral directors get caught in the middle, not having the only person that's going to be making that decision, which is your agent, which make all the decisions for you when you pass away. So that blended family can quickly creep up with mom wanted this, dad wanted this. And I did have a client that, I mean, her and her husband, he wanted to be buried with his first wife when at the veterans cemetery, and his second wife of 20 some odd years and him had a very hard conversation with me about, well, what am I going to get? I want to be buried with you too. And he couldn't have his two wives buried with him. So these hard conversations, like knowing ahead of time what to expect is important, but documents, banking, knowing what funeral, who's going to be making those decisions for you, talking to your employer, considering short-term disability. If you are afforded a group long-term care policy, by all means, grab onto that. That seems to be the thing that nobody can buy and afford anymore, because we are going to, at some point, most people might end up in a facility, and that long-term care policy is really good to have in place. I hope that answered your question.
It did. It's great. One more little, how about the utility bills and things like that? Should you be on those? How does that
So,
work?
yeah, so on those, if I always tell people, do not do anything. Don't call anybody. Don't call the mortgage company. Don't call the electric company, the water company, the internet. Don't call anybody until you have a death certificate in your hand. That death certificate is your passport. It is what says to a company, oh, my dad died, my husband died, my mom died, and you have to have somebody that's going to take over that bill. And so we have had clients that the aunts, mom dies, kids are going, they're grieving, they're coming back at night, all the electricity's off, the water's off. And why? Because an aunt thought that she would be helpful in calling and notifying the utilities. And utility company said, well, who's the next person in charge? Who's going to pay this bill? Who's going to take it over? And quickly, if they don't have somebody that's going to take over paying for that bill, they will turn off the utilities on families. So, having that conversation ahead of time and telling people don't do anything. I will say I just met with a widow last week. Her husband unexpectedly died on Monday. And she came in because she wanted to make sure her finances were in order, the beneficiaries, everything was set up. So I was meeting with her and her financial advisor, and he was assuring her everything's good. There's no worries. And she looked at me and she said, "What don't I know?" And I said, "Well, who is your durable power of attorney? Like who financially will make decisions for you and medical decisions for you if something happens to you?" And she said, "My husband." And we don't have any kids. So I said, okay, well, then first thing we need to do is walk across the hall to the attorney who was, thank God there was one across the hall, and asked him to draw up a durable power of attorney and a medical power of attorney for her so that she could identify somebody. Because I told her the chances of you going into the hospital is high. And because of anxiety, of hypertension, I've had clients that go in for chest pains. And all of a sudden, if you don't have a medical power of attorney making decisions for you, or you don't have that financial, all of a sudden you've got somebody in play that's coming in from maybe that you wouldn't expect to take over making financial and medical decisions for you.
Okay, we have one question in the chat. It says, is there a group like you, what you do in Kentucky that you work with that can assist, like you
So,
mentioned, or
yeah,
how do people connect to you, or what's the best way to
yeah.
go?
So you can go to our website, which is lossoflifeadvocates.com. There's an intake form there, and you can put your information in. We will reach back out to you at a convenient time that's both good for you and us, and we can do an intake call. Everybody gets 30 minutes for free. But I will say one of my favorite people is Molly Locker, Mollylyacher. She is actually in Nashville, Tennessee, and she actually helps families navigate before and after a loss. She doesn't have the full scale of services that we do, but there's Molly Locker there. There is Rachel Donnelly in Atlanta, Georgia, and Rachel. Let's see, Rachel, Molly, and there's one more girl. She's in North Carolina, and I'm happy to get all those resources for you because they're kind of there in that area. But they all do different things. One of them kind of does coaching along this lines. Rachel helps with families with estate and planning and ahead of time. She'll help with packing out, which families get stuck with. And then Molly also helps from Nashville, Tennessee. But we've been kind of growing, so there's a big network, and they've got a company called PALS, PALS, and the PALs are professional after loss professionals, but they also work with many people across the country and actually a few in Australia.
Okay, so if you will get those resources, those names to me,
Absolutely.
I will forward them because I'll do a follow-up email here.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
I think that is fantastic. I don't see any other questions in our chat box. So, other than some very complimentary things, this has been wonderful, excellent. They can really relate. So, I appreciate that. So, I want to thank you. I'm going to stop the recording and we'll still see if for a minute if any other questions come up. But Esther, I can't say enough. Thank you
Thank
so much.
you. Thank you so much.